All right, welcome back for another deep dive. We love to really get into these primary sources, and today we're going to be looking at a particularly interesting one. The shareholder letters that Jeff Bezos used to write every year for Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this one we're looking at today is from 2009, and it's kind of like a time capsule, right? Because 2009, think about that for a second. The
Yeah.
world was in a very different place, right in the middle of like the global financial crisis. So much uncertainty. And here's Amazon, just kind of like chugging along, setting these
Uh,
ambitious
We
goals.
weren't just chugging along. They were setting 452 goals for 2010. It's kind of mind-boggling.
452 goals. Wow. And what really stood out to me when I was looking through these goals was just how many of them were focused on the customer experience, like a ridiculous amount. Like
Yeah.
360 out of 452. That's not just like, oh, we like our customers, like a full-blown obsession.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
completely baked into their DNA even back then.
Yeah.
And Bezos really spells it out in the letter. He says, quote, "Start with customers and work backwards." That's like the Amazon mantra.
Yeah. And that really comes through when you look at the specifics of those customer-centric goals. It's not just like empty talk. They
Yeah.
were making some really deliberate moves.
Right, like their global expansion, for example.
Okay, yeah. They were growing like crazy back then.
But it wasn't just about adding new markets. It was about tailoring their offerings to each specific market. Like, they were focusing on automotive in Japan, shoes and apparel in China. They really wanted to understand the local needs and preferences.
So it wasn't just like, hey, we're Amazon, we sell everything. It was more like, we're Amazon and we get you.
Exactly. And that attention to detail extended to the online experience, too. They were investing heavily in things like richer product descriptions
Mhm.
and adding tons of images to product pages, almost like they were trying to recreate the experience of browsing a physical store, but online.
Ah, making it more visual, more engaging.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, we can't forget about their big push for free shipping.
Oh, yeah, that's become like their signature move, right?
Yeah, back in 2009, they were already expanding options like Amazon Prime and free Super Saver shipping, which, seems like a small thing, but it really removes a major barrier for online shoppers.
Makes that buy button a lot more tempting.
Exactly. And it's interesting to see how many of these initiatives from 2009 are still core to Amazon's strategy today.
Right. It's like the DNA was already there. But here's something that I found kind of puzzling when I was looking at those 452 goals. There was hardly any mention of, the typical business stuff like revenue or free cash flow.
Hmm.
Were they just being like, super altruistic back then?
I don't think it was about altruism. It was more about their commitment to playing the long game.
Hmm.
They were willing to prioritize long-term growth, even if it meant maybe sacrificing some immediate profits.
So it's like they weren't ignoring the financial side of things. They were just taking a more strategic approach.
Exactly. They were investing heavily in building a loyal customer base, expanding their infrastructure, experimenting with new technologies, all with the understanding that these investments might not pay off right away.
It's a bold move, especially during a financial crisis when most companies are, battening down the hatches, just trying to survive.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but, Bezos had actually laid out this long-term vision years earlier in his 1997 shareholder letter. He talked about how shareholder value would be created over the long term.
Oh, so this wasn't just like a reaction to the crisis. It was a fundamental part of their philosophy.
Exactly. And you can really see that philosophy reflected in the specific areas they were investing in back in 2009.
Like their acquisition of Zappos, for example.
Zappos. Yeah, that was a big one.
They were already pretty big in the online shoe world, known for like their amazing customer service.
Right. It wasn't just about adding another revenue stream. It was about acquiring a company that really knew how to create like a delightful and personalized shopping experience.
Yeah, like Zappos was all about that like quirky, fun culture.
Exactly. They had mastered a specific aspect of e-commerce, and Amazon saw the value in that.
And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, or I guess the cloud in the room, should we say AWS?
Uh-huh.
Even back in 2009, they were pouring resources into what was then, a pretty new, unproven technology.
AWS, Amazon Web Services, it was a huge bet on the future of cloud computing.
Yeah, at the time, most businesses thought of computing infrastructure as something, you had in your own data center.
Right. It was all about physical servers and maintaining all that.
But Amazon saw a different path. Like, what if we could turn this into a service?
Yeah, rent out our massive computing power to other companies.
It was a brilliant move. Gave them a huge first mover advantage in what's become, a multi-billion-dollar industry.
It's like they were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
Exactly. And again, it goes back to that long-term vision. They were willing to invest in something that might not have seemed profitable right away.
Yeah, but had the potential to completely change the game.
And speaking of long-term vision, they actually included their 1997 shareholder letter in this 2009 letter.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
It wasn't just a nostalgia trip. It was like a statement.
It was a way of saying, hey, look, we're still the same company driven by the same principles, even though we've grown so much.
Right. The core values were still their customer obsession, long-term thinking.
Exactly. It was a powerful message, especially during a time of so much uncertainty.
And it all leads to this concept that's become like synonymous with Amazon, that day one mentality.
Oh, yeah. Bezos talks about that explicitly in the letter.
He says it's still day one.
It's like a reminder to never get complacent, to always approach business with the same hunger and agility as a startup,
Yeah, like you're just getting started, even if you're already a giant company.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
it's easy to say that, but how do you actually maintain that day one energy when you're as big as Amazon?
Right. It seems almost impossible.
It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
But the letter shows how they were putting this mentality into action.
Okay, so how are they doing that?
Well, they were expanding into new categories, like aggressively building out AWS, constantly pushing boundaries, not just sitting back and, counting their money.
Right. Always experimenting, always innovating.
Exactly. And that day one mentality seems to have really permeated the whole company culture.
Yeah, even today you hear Amazon employees talking about it like it's this sacred thing.
It's become part of their identity,
Mm.
and, it's definitely played a role in their ability to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, but let's step back for a minute and think about the bigger picture here. We've been talking about all these bold moves, this long-term vision, but this was all happening during a global financial crisis.
Right. It's almost like a paradox.
While other companies were, cutting back, playing it safe, Amazon was doubling down on their investments.
Yeah, it's like they were completely unfazed by the economic turmoil.
So was it just a case of like Amazon were immune to recessions, or was there something more strategic going on?
I think it's more nuanced than that. They were already operating with that long-term mindset.
Right, they weren't going to let a little crisis derail their plans.
Exactly. They saw the crisis as an opportunity to widen the gap between themselves and their competitors.
It's like they used the crisis to accelerate their dominance.
Yeah, while everyone else was weakened, they're getting stronger.
And by continuing to invest in customer experience and, future-proof technologies like AWS,
Right.
they were ensuring that they'd be in an even better position once the economy recovered.
It's a brilliant strategy.
Yeah.
Maybe a little ruthless, but definitely brilliant.
And it seems to have paid off big time.
There's no doubt that Amazon's success is partly due to their ability to see opportunities that others missed.
Yeah, to take risks when others were too afraid.
Exactly. But it also raises some questions about, the potential downsides of this kind of aggressive growth.
Yeah, we've been focusing on the positive aspects of their approach, but
Yeah.
what about the other side of the coin?
Right. There have been criticisms about, their impact on smaller businesses, their labor practices, their environmental footprint.
These are complex issues with no easy answers.
It's a reminder that even the most innovative and successful companies, they're not perfect.
Right, they can have blind spots, and it's important to talk about these things.
Absolutely. We need to be having open and honest conversations about the impact of these companies on the world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but, if we had to distill it down to like the key takeaways, what would you say are the big things for our listeners to walk away with?
I think there are a few really important threads running through this 2009 letter. Like, first and foremost, their absolute commitment to the customer experience. That's been a constant from the beginning.
Right, like it's not just lip service. They really put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And then there's their willingness to prioritize the long-term vision over short-term profits.
Yeah.
That's not something you see a lot of companies doing, especially during a crisis.
Yeah, they were playing the long game for sure. And then, of course, there's that famous day one mentality, that idea of always staying hungry, always staying agile.
Yeah, like you're always just getting started no matter how big you get.
Right. And we saw how all of these principles actually played out in their actions. The expansion into new markets, the investment in the online experience, the big bet on AWS, the acquisition of Zappos. It's all connected.
It's really a textbook example of how a clear set of values combined with, really strong execution can lead to incredible success.
Yeah, but as we've also discussed, there's that other side of the coin, the potential downsides of this kind of growth.
Right. We have to think about the impact on smaller businesses, the
Yeah.
questions about labor practices, the environmental footprint. You can't just ignore those things.
It's complex. There are no easy answers, but it's a good reminder that even the most innovative and, seemingly unstoppable companies, they still operate within a larger system.
Yeah, they have to be accountable for their actions.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Amazon's 2009 world, what do you think our listeners should be thinking about? Like, what are some of the big questions that we've raised?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at how these strategies have played out over time. Have they continued to be successful? How has their approach shaped the landscape of e-commerce and technology? And, maybe even more importantly, what lessons can we learn from their journey, both the good and the bad, as we, try to navigate this increasingly digital world?
Those are some really great questions. It's like we've opened up this treasure chest of insights, and now it's up to our listeners to kind of grapple with them and figure out what it all means.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway might be that there are no simple answers. Even the most successful companies have their flaws, and it's up to us as consumers, as citizens, to really think critically about the future we want to create.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into Amazon's 2009 shareholder letter. It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And as always, keep those brains buzzing. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.